This episode is made possible by our generous patrons.
Expecto Patronum! Expecto Patronum!
Welcome to episode 109 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book
And then see the movie.
I'm a Gryffindor.
And I'm a Ravenclaw.
And this week we discuss Alfonso Cuarón's 2004 film, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. So, I don't know about you, but this movie, like, with everything we know about Children of Men after covering that months ago, and knowing this, like, leads into Children of Men, do you feel like there's a connection between these two in a weird way?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there is. I noticed there's a oneer in here that is not nearly as technically incredible as some of the stuff we get in Children of Men, but I could see some precursors, sure.
Yeah, for me it was like this sort of like very obviously British story that's like muted colors and like dark. Yeah. It's a dark film. Like there's things that especially in comparison to the other Harry Potter movies, but I don't know, there's something about like maybe watching this as a double feature, like Prisoner of Azkaban and Into Children of Men, that kind of just like in keeping with somebody's filmography. I don't know. I was just excited thinking about the connections. But you talked about the oneer. Let's talk about that very, very briefly here. Yeah, I mean, the use of that oneer that we'll talk about that's in the Leaky Cauldron.
You want to describe what happens in that scene? Yeah,
so basically it's the Leaky Cauldron scene. We open and Harry's seeing the Weasleys. He's seeing Arthur and Molly and greeting them. The whole Leaky Cauldron, there's a whole bustle going on, people cleaning, people arriving. And then Arthur takes Harry off to the side and starts talking to him about Sirius Black and like why he might come looking for him. And as we learn more and things get darker and we learn that like he might be trying to kill Harry, we descend into like darkness. So that's kind of the premise of the scene, but...
Well, and you also have the framing of having Sirius Black be in between them, looming at one point, and then in between them, literally, while they're talking about him, and he's the threat of Sirius Black is looming over this movie, and some of that stuff you could look at it and say, like, maybe it's a bit heavy-handed, but the language of this movie is on one hand, like, sort of overt in a lot of that kind of stuff. But I think when you remember what the age group is that this movie's technically designed for. So I think it is a fantastically crafted movie, yet it's not done in a way that's going to be inaccessible for a younger audience.
So you mentioned the fact that, you know, the other one in Children of Men is maybe more pronounced and maybe more technically amazing. Yeah. It was pretty funny. I was reading something that said that Alfonso Cuarón was talking to Guillermo del Toro about like about the fact that he had been approached for this film, and basically Guillermo del Toro was like, "Are you an idiot? Like, read the book and take it." He's like, if you read the book, like you're gonna take it. And I guess once he realized he was gonna take it, Guillermo del Toro gave him the advice of kind of toning down some of his like really fantastical filmmaking experimental things, like toning it down a bit. And I think that like you're right. We both have seen this video and we swear by this channel at this point. Like we talk about it enough, but it's a YouTube channel called Nerdwriter, and Nerdwriter 1. This I think might be my favorite of his video essays, and he really dives into like why.
I don't know if I'm ready to say that, but I do like it.
So the reason why is because I subscribe to a lot of what he was saying. This idea that like these movies were as important to kids growing up as the books were. And these movies were, because of this movie, like the Cuarón film, and like teaching a film language and teaching what technically helps tell the story of a film and what pushes along the idea or the tone or whatever you're trying to portray. These techniques can be used to portray that. And so I think it's really important for a young audience, like people who are watching Harry Potter at this time, to be exposed to that. And I love that Nerdwriter brings this up. He talks about how these early scenes, the couple of early scenes, are maybe more in keeping with what you would see in one of the first two Harry Potter films, like blowing up Aunt Marge and like the night bus, are very like in keeping with that more whimsical feel, and then
Yeah.
moving into this darker tone and using these techniques to portray that. And I think really efficiently too, is that's the main thing from the Leaky Cauldron is you're getting a sense of atmosphere and environment, and that's the main thing that I think there's a couple of things that I think he really brings to this Harry Potter universe, and a sense of environment and a sense of like laying out where things are and like putting it in the mind of everybody who's watching Harry Potter. I think he does that really well. And the scene in the Leaky Cauldron, it's the details in the background we talked about in Children of Men. It's like these, there's a practical effect early on in one of the Leaky Cauldron shots where somebody walks up and like makes a glass disappear into a rag, like somebody who's like a barkeep or something. And like just those little things, like somebody's doing practical magic in a Harry Potter movie. Like
That's cool.
Like an actual magician was like brought on to do that. And so like that sort of like background, scene setting, environment, ambience, like I think that is what makes a really indelible film, and something that like will keep you thinking and like make the world feel really realized.
So it sounds like in a general sense, you love this movie.
This is
what I'm getting.
it's really hard for me to not just out and say this is my favorite Harry Potter movie. I want to say for now it's my favorite that we've watched. And as we go on, I think I'll revisit the other ones and analyze them as deeply as I have these first three. And then I'll come to a conclusion then.
So for me, I agree with everything you're saying. I think this is a fantastic film. I think it is extremely well crafted. However, I think it is flawed in some ways, in one particular way in general. But I want to sort of tease that as something I'm going to explore throughout this episode. Because there is also, I've noticed among Harry Potter fans, a contingent of people who don't really like this movie that much, or think that it's not their favorite, at least, you know what I mean?
Right.
Or think that it's overrated. And I think I'm picking up on some of the reasons why, for me, going through this experience of just now reading the book for the first time and then immediately watching the movie. I think I'm picking up on some stuff that maybe I would have missed otherwise. But yeah, I'm not going to like fully go into that yet. I'm going to tease that for later in the episode. However, talking about the muted colors reminded me of one of the things I think is brilliant about this movie, and that's there's these motifs, there's these moments where he's foreshadowing things all through the language of cinema, and so much of it works so well that the more I was thinking about it, the more I was unpacking more and more of these things, and I'll talk about them as they come up probably as we go. But you mentioned the muted colors earlier, and to me that completely mirrors the sort of atmospheric, thematic stuff of this story of you have sort of this warm, safe place of Hogwarts, yet it's being encroached upon by the outside world, which is dangerous and scary and adult and dark. And so all the time you get these scenes where like someone is like they're inside Hogwarts having a fun time, and then we zoom out and go through the window and it's surrounded by dementors. Right, and then you have them on the train, and there's a huge storm going on outside, and there's just all these times where it's like what would otherwise just be this like congenial, friendly, happy scene, yet it's surrounded by some sort of darkness. And the muted colors, I think, adds to that, because in the frame you'll often see like one or two things that has color, whether it's someone's neckwear, like we see like a red scarf, or we see Hagrid's like really fun tie he's wearing later, and like some of this stuff has a little bit of color and a pop to it, but it'll be almost the only thing on screen that has that. So it feels kind of like it's surrounded by darkness and gray and kind of being suppressed in a way that the other early movies do not, right? Like there's color everywhere, everything's so vibrant. To where it's interesting because it's like that language of cinematography, I think, is backing up the themes of the movie in a really cool way.
Yeah. And I think more than anything, this is a movie about transitions, right? It's a transition from more childhood things to more adult things. It's a transition from the movies also in keeping with that. And these kids are growing older. They're not children anymore. They're going to push back against authority. They're going to push back against things that you know, as they become individuals, they're going to push back against things. And I think that's really shown through the characters. I think that this is one of the movies where the actors really start to take on their role a little more, rather than it being about, you know, some kids who are kind of, you know, they're all like cute kids who are running around, and they're all brave in ways, and they're all smart in ways, and they're all silly in ways. And yet I feel like in this movie, we really get a differentiating moments where it's like Harry's brave, but he's also scared. He's fearful of the Dementors, and the things that scare him are like very existential things, like very scary death and all of these things that he's had to deal with.
Trauma.
And so like he's dealing with that, and yet he's brave through that. And we see all the characters being brave and smart and all of this and silly moments and all that. But this is I think this is where we see Hermione really come into her own, is like, she's smart clearly, but she's clever. She's resourceful.
Capable.
She's exactly. And so it's more than just like book smart. It's like really starting to flesh out these characters and have them like concretely shown in their own roles.
Yeah. It reminded me of something else with my muted colors thing I was noticing, is I think it forces you to pay attention to other things that are going on. That I think when you have this feast of like bright colors and interesting things to look at, you kind of get dazzled by them in earlier movies. But here, like, you'll see this drab scene, and you'll be forced to think about like how the camera's moving, or what exactly is being shown, or the performance of the actor that you're looking at, instead of like paying attention to the crazy thing that's going on behind them, or that weird fun thing on the table in front of them that's, you know, so bright. And so it forces you to look into different places on the screen than you did in the first two movies. So you watch it differently.
Right. And I think you're like burdened by this like bleakness, right? So it's like, it's keeping you, it's tension through the movie. It's like this, like, it's looming over the entire movie. And we basically, you know, said that. But I think that with the kind of things that you've been talking about, like the sort of reflections in the mirrors and the windows, and these are all, some of these are basically arguments that Nerdwriter is making. This idea of like reflection and inner thought in these characters, and like, and seeing themselves, like using a mirror as a reflection, and then again the camera. Honestly, that's the thing that really just blows me away in this film, is just the camera moves, and or like the fact that it's constantly moving. Right, it's always in motion. It's always interesting to look at, and I find that to be, you know, there are directors who I think can just like masterfully pull off a lockdown shot, or even a movie like Yasujiro Ozu, who's a Japanese filmmaker, and he's famous for just having lockdown shots, wide shots, and just like letting life play out before the lens. This is kind of the opposite of that. This is like the movement through space, and the way that, you know, it can be overused, but I think that in a case like this, it's very clearly motivated, and that's the main thing. As long as it's motivated and it's adding something and it's moving us through space, that's something that not a lot of other mediums can do. So I think that like that's used expertly in this movie to, as Nerdwriter puts it, to like put a sort of like a forward momentum to the film, and like this sort of like pacing that really keeps everything interesting. And personally, just like seeing camera movements, I find to be really engaging in film. So like that, I guess the main thing I want to say with this film in terms of all the Harry Potter films is, I don't know what future Harry Potter films without this film setting the tone and setting the vibe. We're talking about bleak colors, that plays through. Like bleak colors and this sort of like tone that we get here, this dark oppression of sort of tension and bleakness, and maybe the dark side is kind of looming over us. That plays through the rest of the movies. And I think that, I don't know, it'd be weird to even think of like if Chris Columbus had directed this one, the third one, because he directed the first two. Like what does Prisoner of Azkaban look like with Chris Columbus directing it? Because originally he was attached to do all of the movies.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, alternate universe stuff, who knows? But I have a lot of like specific stuff I want to talk about, but I feel like now's not the time. I want to get into some plot before we get to that. Do you have anything to talk about before we get into plot?
I did want to talk just about Cuarón at this point in his career. Okay, we talked about it more in our Children of Men coverage, and I recommend you check that out if you're interested in him and his background. But he's a Mexican filmmaker, and he's at this point prolific. But this was only his fifth film in his career, and he was trying to get Children of Men made, and we talked about this in our Children of Men coverage. But he couldn't get funding, he couldn't get somebody to back it, and so he was approached for the Harry Potter movie, and he realized that if he did this, it could not only help him kind of get some context and some perspective on this British, you know, land and like everything about it. So he took this in order to basically do one for them and one for me, which is what a lot of filmmakers do. You'll see filmmakers like Christopher Nolan did this for a while, where he did like one of his own, and then he'd do a property that's already been established, with The Dark Knight and Inception, and then, you know, The Dark Knight and then Interstellar, things like that. I think this was a case of Cuarón doing that. He saw the studio system, and he was like, well, if I work in the studio system, I'll get exposure, and I'll, you know, if I pull it off, then there's a lot that you can move from.
Raise his profile.
With that, exactly. So
Yeah.
so he did that, but I think he approached it as he would approach any other film, and I really respect him for that, because as we've talked about it, I think he brought a level of filmmaking that hadn't been seen up to this point. And honestly, like, you don't necessarily see in a ton of these huge franchises.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to talk a little bit about that idea. I know it's kind of an aside, but the idea of one for them and one for me, artistically, I find interesting, because I think for me, I'm always excited when I see, not necessarily an existing IP, but when I see a well-respected, highly capable director taking on a project that has wide appeal, and like gets everybody excited. And I guess my one thing I don't like about that saying is that it sort of implies that those movies are somehow like lesser. Like, it's like, oh, yes, that's for them. It's not for me. It doesn't make me feel good. But, like, I would challenge creatives to find just as much joy in creating something that has wide appeal, and still pushing boundaries. And I think he does here. I'm not saying that specifically Alfonso Cuarón didn't do that or something, but just in general, when we're talking about this idea, it always seems a little off to me to act like anything that is super broad is going to be somehow less artistically valid, and I don't know. I'm not saying you believe that at all, but just that's that saying. I've heard that in a lot of places. Writers will talk about this sometimes, and I don't know. I feel like the broadly appealing stories can be for you as well as a creator. don't
Definitely.
lock that off from yourself.
Well, and I think that most people who use that saying aren't necessarily saying it in like a derogatory or negative way. I think that it's more of a it's a system, right? So the studio system, you have more people have a say in those films. Whereas you're saying one for them, as in like, I have to work very closely with other people who are going to tell me what I can and cannot do. Versus one for me, which means like I have full lock picture, everything. I have final script.
So when you say them, who are you imagining them are? Like, is that the studio?
I'm imagining studio,
because I always thought it to be the fans, like one for them, like the masses.
No, I always think like the studio system.
Okay, interesting. That's a different read on that saying. Because I can see that if it's like, I'm going to make one that the studio system will be happy with. Then that's almost a different thing. I guess it's because I've heard that same saying in like writing, whereas that doesn't make as much sense to do that. It's more like, I'm going to write something for them, as in it's going to be mass appeal, and then I'm going to write something for me, as in it's artistically relevant to me, but maybe not a lot of people are going to love it. And that's fine if you want to think of it that way. I just think that you can be sort of selling yourself short on some of those more broadly appealing projects. Like, they don't have to be something that you don't find less interesting.
Yeah. And I think we are seeing a lot of studios kind of give filmmakers the reins some more. They have to stay within a certain boundary. Like, there's certain things that have to be hit. But I think that like someone who comes to mind for me is Taika Waititi. I love this director. Everything that he did until Thor Ragnarok, I was shouting from the rooftops. I love all of those films up to that point. And then he got Thor Ragnarok, and I was like, this is an interesting voice to bring into a movie like this. And I think ultimately, like, that's a Taika film. Although it's a Marvel studio film,
and
that's a Taika movie.
That's a great example of what I'm talking about. Like, that can be fantastic and should be celebrated, as someone who's coming in and hopefully he doesn't feel like I made this movie for them, not for me, Right.
And then, but like, we can also see him like bouncing to the other side now, and he's making Jojo Rabbit, which is clearly probably for him, so it's like kind of the for them, for him kind of thing. But I don't know. I like you say, it's kind of what you get out of it. Ultimately, I think if any filmmaker would tell you, you're going to dedicate 2 years of your life or 3 years of your life to this movie, so you have to care about it very deeply. So I don't know. It's I think it's an interesting thing to talk about. So yeah, with all that being said, I just wanted to kind of put into perspective where we were at with Cuarón. He had this is his 5th movie. Up until this point, he had directed Solo con tu Pareja, A Little Princess, Great Expectations, and then the one that I think really put him on the map for a lot of people as far as like an indie film and that did well at festivals is Y Tu Mama Tambien. And so apparently what that did was, because of the success of that film and so many people saw it, names like J.K. Rowling and I think David Heyman was a producer at this point, and they both were like 100% on board to have him there, and they had to convince the studio to allow, because up until that, I mean, Y Tu Mama Tambien is clearly not in the same, it's like a coming of age. It's more, I wouldn't even say it's coming of age. It's more like, I think it's just an adult, it's an adult film about coming of age. And so there's like a lot of sex in it and things like that. But, they could see the director through his work, and they could see, like, I guess Little Princess was the one that really sold them on the fact that he could direct this movie.
That's really fascinating too. Yeah. I mean, it's such a big decision because we talked about in our book coverage that this novel marks a turning point in the series. And J.K. Rowling had to know that, obviously, she wrote it, going into this. And I think the decision was made, we need to go in a different direction creatively with our director than we've gone in the first two, to sort of mark that shift. And so I think it's smart to look for someone else to do it. And I mean, it would be fascinating, like, exercise, thought experiment to watch that movie and try and imagine what someone like J.K. Rowling might be thinking while watching it, trying to, like, project onto Harry Potter as a franchise. Like, what is this director going to be like if we tried to get him? It would just be interesting to think about. I don't know. Like, what did she see in that movie that made her think this is the guy?
I think it's just the voice, right? You see a creative mind, and you see someone who can craft an interesting story and take you on a journey through film, right? Through the camera.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think, like I say, I think it was a mixture of A Little Princess and Y Tu Mama Tambien, and then David Heyman was pushing for it. So ultimately, I think they got it done. But it is interesting to think Chris Columbus was attached to direct all of them, and I guess but to this point, he realized, like, he wasn't going to get to see his kids grow up if he didn't back off some of these movies. And that's also not to say, I don't like the idea of, like, oh, Cuarón is a better director. I think that they both are very good at what they do, right? Chris Columbus very clearly has a style that works so well for those first two movies.
Yeah, and it was appropriate for the books that he was adapting. It would have been inappropriate to take this vision and apply it to the previous book. It wouldn't have matched the material.
Definitely. So I think we can move into, like, plot at this point. I did want to mention just some of the actors very quickly, because as usual, the Harry Potter movies have British royalty as like, literally they have sirs and people who've been knighted, and just, like, everyone in Britain got involved in these movies. And the addition in this film is just mind-blowing. So unfortunately, we had the passing of Richard Harris, who was the first Dumbledore, and so he had to be recast. I think people have different opinions on this, but Michael Gambon comes in, and he's the new Dumbledore. I want to ask you before I answer, how do you feel about the new Dumbledore? How do you feel about how he fits? I think maybe not even comparing it to Harris's performance, but more specifically the book.
Right. So, I mean, I think it's impossible not to compare it to the previous performance, especially when we're talking about the movies. This, like, going in as a moviegoer, this is the change. This is, like, one of the biggest moments of going, like, oh, this is weird and different. And obviously it's due to a tragedy, and you can't control that. But it's interesting to me, too, that this character takes a shift. And I don't know that it was necessarily the actor. I think a lot of people, like, say, oh, this actor played him so much more this and that. But that could have been direction, too. Mm-hmm. And I think Dumbledore in this movie moves away from what I think of in the first two movies as almost a Santa wizard, who is the head of Hogwarts. He's very warm. He's very, like, fatherly, grandfatherly, and he and all this stuff, right? And here we get, like, a sassier, more sarcastic, joking, maybe a little bit less warm due to that. And you combo that with a change in actor, and it's a little disorienting, I think, for people. Mm-hmm. But it marks a change in how Dumbledore will be played throughout the rest of the movies, right? And it actually gives the character maybe a little bit more of an edge to him, a little bit more dimensions to his personality. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Ultimately, I really, really enjoyed Richard Harris's performance. I think there's a lot of mystery there, right? For me, it was always like, he's so mysterious. There's just, like, I could never figure out what's going on in his head. He's so all-knowing. And then I think, knowing what I know going down the line of books, I think that Michael Gambon really fits what a Dumbledore could be portrayed as. Because, like you said, I think there's more depth to it. I think there's more, like, he's not just all-knowing. He's not just this. Dumbledore can make mistakes. Dumbledore, is quirky, and I like there's a lot of energy there, right? There's a lot of
quirky's a good word for it.
and I enjoy that, and I like that performance. I do understand people getting used to a certain way that things have been done the past two movies, and like missing that. And I totally understand that, but ultimately I think I do like that kind of like more energetic, more quirky and over the top Dumbledore. So other additions that we have to talk about: Emma Thompson, incredible as Trelawney. We talked about her a lot in our book coverage, but like she just absolutely pulls that character off the page.
There's so many funny like little moments with that character, like the just the introduction about the sight, and she's like, "Oh, the greatest sight into the beyond," and then she like bumps into the table, and it's so funny.
Yeah, I read that her glasses are literally magnifying glasses. Like that's why her eyes are so large.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah. So and then David Thewlis as Lupin, who I mentioned is like Lupin's one of my favorite parts of all of these movies.
Great performance. It's actually kind of weird to see him playing a genuinely good guy, but of course he's got this dark edge to him, so it works. But the most recent thing I've seen him in, I think, obviously I saw him in Wonder Woman as the bad guy, but other than that, Fargo season 3. I don't know if you've been keeping up with Fargo. Have you been watching that show?
Yeah, I've seen the first 3 seasons. The fourth one hasn't come out yet, right?
Right. I don't think so. But season 3, he's the main villain, and he is so good in season 3 as the villain. It's so scary and otherworldly, and it just I have a lot of admiration for that actor and the stuff that he does, and it's cool to see him here. And I just couldn't help but think of that. Like, obviously, it comes much later in his career, but if you're a fan of his work, check out Fargo season 3. Mm-hmm. Or all of Fargo, because it's all amazing in my opinion.
So, and then of course the other addition is Gary Oldman as Sirius Black.
Yes, love Gary Oldman,
love him, and for my money is I don't know, he's one of the greatest living actors. Period. He everything he's ever been in is incredible, and he's done serious, he's done weird, he's been a villain, he's been an ally, he's been all of these things.
And not just a villain, he's like one of the greatest villains. I mean, not just one of them. He has played some of the greatest villains that I've ever seen in movies. Yeah, he can be so good as a villain. He can also be so likable as a hero or a protagonist of a movie. He's got incredible range, and honestly, he's a howitzer brought in to play this role. Now, it's an important role, obviously, going forward, especially, and in this movie. But he has relatively small amount of screen time, and he really commits to it. And I don't know if that's maybe the filmmaker affecting him and getting the right performance out of him or what, but he's delivering on his small amount of screen time. And also, you know, just the moving images that they captured of him screaming and just looking like a madman in all of those like wanted posters is so good, to where even when he's not on screen doing anything, like he's still looming.
Though I think for a long time, I think he, you know, he's had mounting popularity, maybe even pushed along by you know, movies like The Dark Knight where he's Commissioner Gordon, and then like a movie like this where he's Sirius Black. It's
so funny that he's Commissioner Gordon and so subdued in those movies compared to how off the wall crazy he can be in other movies.
That's what I was about to get at, is he's so transformative. And like I think people have been saying this forever, is that he's so transformative in every role he's ever taken on. And you know, you can see like the physical transformation, everything like that. And a lot of people would point to like his Winston Churchill fairly recently, of like a performance that's a transformative, and he's just like unrecognizable. But he's done this his entire career. This role is like, I didn't even know who Gary Oldman really was until this movie, and then I see this movie, and then I start seeing him pop up everywhere, and realize how legendary he is. And you know, this came out in 2004, so I would have been like 11 or 12, I guess. And so like this is like right around this time I start going back into people's filmography and like really falling in love with film, and you know, see something like Leon the Professional, and we get Gary Oldman. Everyone and like just his over the top performances, and like you say, Commissioner Gordon is like, it's a great performance, but it's not anything flashy.
Was it Zorg and Fifth Element, and he's just so many great roles. He played Dracula famously. He's done so many great things, and I think he's a perfect for this role, because they needed somebody that can be scary and that you can look at on a wanted poster and go, oh my god, that's definitely a villain. But then can also pull off that shift to being very, very likable. So I think perfectly cast as Sirius Black.
Definitely. And then obviously just to speak to the returning cast that's already just filled with absolute legends. We have Maggie Smith, who as McGonagall is like gotta be. It's McGonagall and Lupin for me as far as like my favorite teachers. They're just both absolutely incredible. We have Alan Rickman as Snape. Like it's just every single person in this. Robbie Coltrane as Rubius Hagrid.
I don't know. Like I think this is maybe my favorite Snape movie so far. And it's interesting because I found myself, I felt like a lot of the stuff he did in the book was like beyond the pale and sort of made me dislike him more in the book. But here I felt like a lot of the stuff was more understandable. And I don't know, I was kind of rooting for Snape.
Yeah.
I get it. I get why people like, and Alan Rickman is like, I love Alan Rickman. It's just great to see him in this role.
Yeah, he absolutely kills it. And I want to talk about something else that you just made me think of talking about that. So we noticed that like a lot of the costuming changes. Like we, instead of seeing the kids always in robes, we're now seeing them in like modern updated clothing. And that was a decision that was made by Cuaron as well as Janie Tamaim. And she was the third costume designer that the series had. And I think from here on, she basically was the costume designer for the rest of the films. I think the decision to put them in modern clothes grounded them and made them more relatable to everyone. And I think it also like went far in terms of like representing the characters, right? Like, so what somebody wears, you can just look at them and kind of tell stuff about them. And I think that was used very well. And also just seeing like the disheveled robes when they were wearing robes, like everybody was wearing them differently. Some people had their cloak off. Some people had like the ties pulled down. I don't know. It's just like that realism. I loved that, like, in addition to the environment that we're getting, the scenic shots that are linking together locations in Hogwarts, that I think is also very important in terms of putting it in context for people's minds. That mixed with like the realism of the students. And I just think like this goes a long way to set up the rest of the series.
Well, and we were talking about the camera movement earlier. I think you combine that with the sort of like handheld camera feel that you get for some of these like more spectacular scenes, like the first time they walk into Hogwarts, seeing it from sort of ground person level, it does that. It has that effect of putting you in the scene and making it feel grounded and real in a way that like a soaring shot will never feel. So that was definitely cool.
Okay, so I think this is the perfect time to move into plot. I have a few sections that I'm going to read, like 6, I believe, and then we're just going to react to each part. So Harry Potter has been spending another dissatisfying summer with the Dursleys. When Harry's Aunt Marge insults his parents, he loses his temper and blows her up like a balloon. Harry then flees the Dursleys. The night bus delivers Harry to the Leaky Cauldron, where he is pardoned by Minister of Magic Cornelius Fudge for using magic outside of Hogwarts. After reuniting with his best friends Ron and Hermione, Harry learns that Sirius Black, a convicted supporter of the Dark Wizard Lord Voldemort, has escaped Azkaban prison and intends to kill Harry.
Yeah, so let's talk about this opening. I want to actually start with the very first moment, and that's lighting of the wand while reading in under the covers, right? And a couple things. First off, is it a big deal to you that he's using magic here so brazenly when he's not supposed to be? Because Marge pushes him to it, but here he's just sort of like casually doing it to read. Yeah, is that a problem for you?
I mean, that's what I kind of talked about it a little bit, but it seems to be pretty inconsistent in terms of, so in terms of like this moment for the film, incredible. I think it's great. I think it really sets up his character. He's having to hide. And I love this idea of like him, like not able to fully master Lumos, and he's like having to like constantly cast it. I think it's really fun and really great in terms of wizarding law, which I already feel like is inconsistent even in the books. No, I guess not, because ultimately he was pardoned anyway.
Yeah, and I agree with that. It can be, if you think about it too much, it can be a little bit of a plot hole, maybe. I don't know. But the thing that I think it has going for it is I think it is a foreshadow. It's foreshadowing the most important moment later in the movie of casting the Patronus, because we see the like you said, struggling to cast it becoming more powerful, and then all of a sudden exploding in power, right? And that's essentially what we see happen with Patronus later. It's the opening first moment of a movie, which is always extremely important, and it should be. And I think here it's directly referencing the climax of the film.
All right, so Harry blowing up Aunt Marge. I feel like this I remember seeing this in theaters and being like, whoa, Harry has some attitude to him now, and like really like relating to that.
Without a wand, just out of anger. And not even casting a spell, right? Like, just doing
Well,
it.
we'll talk about magic that doesn't require a wand much later, but I mean, Harry's done this before. We saw him make the glass disappear with the at the zoo in the first one. You know, it's not like
yeah.
he's never cast magic without a wand before. But
Right.
yeah, I think it's showing. The other thing that I was thinking about is like this fluctuation in magic, and it's always clearly been there, but I mentioned it last episode, and this idea that like Expelliarmus is a spell that has differing levels of power. In the book, it's all three of them using Expelliarmus that knocks out Snape, and here in the movie, it's just one. And I guess it's this idea that like each spell has its own, I guess you can cast it harder or something. Like Lumos is casting harder.
With like if you have more emotion behind it and more,
So like Lumos, we saw early on, he's casting it, and it's like smaller, and then it's larger, and then it's huge. Same thing with Expecto Patronum. I think that's something really interesting that's there, because it's almost like the magic isn't really quantified. It's not like one spell. It's not like a 1-to-1 thing per witch or wizard.
Yeah, it's like the spell is a conduit, and it opens a conduit to like your inner magic ability that is like funneling through it, and you can push harder and like, but you have to have that spell present to like focus it, I guess. Maybe you don't have to, but that's what it's serving as, so that it does a certain thing. But yeah, it makes sense to me, like intuitively, that you could make it even more powerful just by like, if you have the power within you and you want it really badly. And I think that's the other thing it's backing up. Like, this movie's telling us that Harry Potter is very powerful. Maybe he even doesn't realize how powerful he is.
Mm-hmm. All right, so he leaves, and we get the first shot of him on the street in the darkness by himself. That's that first shot where you're like, okay, we're in a different place now. It's dark, it's creepy. We see the grim at this point. We think of it as, or maybe even not even think of it. We're like, oh, that's a scary dog. He pulls his wand out. The night bus shows up. I just love, like, there's just him by himself, and the swing set moving, and how creepy all that stuff is. It's just really, it is a large signifier that things are going to be different.
Yeah, and then we move on to the night bus, which is hilarious. I mean, it may be a little over the top, with some of the things that go on, and the shrunken head talking and like all this stuff, but also funny. And like the guy who comes out to talk to him and like ask him what he's doing, he's hilarious. I love the accent. He's like that I don't know what it's called, but it's very British and it's very funny. And I just love it. I don't know. It's good.
It's good. And again, Cuaron is really efficient with delivering exposition, right? Like in terms of like getting Sirius Black out there for the first time. There's a newspaper very quickly. Who's that? Sirius Black. Very quickly goes. And yeah, that scene. So that night bus scene, apparently they shot the night bus traveling at normal driving speeds, and all the other cars were traveling at like a snail's pace. And then they sped up the footage to have the night bus
cool.
like fucking zooming all over the place.
I love it. And we already talked about when they first arrive at Leaky Cauldron and we get the scene, but I do want to mention also, actually, very first time they arrive, one of the guys, I don't know if you caught this, is reading Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, one of the like random people in there. And that just shows there is a lot of like clock, time, all of this stuff that motifs going throughout the movie, where the language of the movie is telling you that time is very important. And it's all setting up, obviously, the sort of fourth act reveal we're going to get later with the time turner. And it was cool to like pick up on that, seeing like having somebody read that, which is also like very grounded science in a world of magic. So the intersection of those two things is also important and very interesting, and something that they're playing with.
Yeah, and I love the idea of a wizard reading that book, right? And by reading it, they're saying there's something here, right? Like whether or not, maybe science is a form of magic or whatever, like there's still some substance to that. So it's
science or magic doesn't necessarily exist outside of science. Like both things can still be true, maybe in this world, right?
Yeah. And another great moment of practical effects. Like he's like using his finger to like stir that tea, and like the use of like showing little magical things happening throughout the world, I find to be so cool.
And that's great in all the Harry Potter movies, honestly. That's something that I think we picked up on the past and continues through. That's some of the like really charming bits of the wizarding world that everybody loves so much.
Mm-hmm. So Arthur tells Harry that Sirius might be after him, and he's like, don't go looking for him. And Harry's like, why would I go looking for someone who wants to kill me? And then we go to we're on the train. And like you said, that shot of coming up on the train with the rain falling, and it puts such a, I don't know, such a different filter in your mind of like what's going to happen.
It's a different feel,
here.
right?
Yeah.
Every other time we've been on our way to Hogwarts, it's been full of excitement about what's to come, and this time it's dark and there's dread and there's a looming threat, and
I love it for being different, because it is like, even as a kid, it really affected me. I was like, whoa, so to get the same trip to Hogwarts a third time. You know, if it's like bright sunny day, they get to Hogwarts. Not that clearly in the second movie they get there on a flying car, it's different, but I'm just saying, like, very bright. The train looks amazing. It's red and gold and flying along, and to get that a third time, I feel like it starts to feel repetitive. So for this to be so different, I think is very welcome. And it's creepy as hell. This whole thing, they're like, they go in, Lupin sleeping in there. Here, let me just read this part actually. The trio returns to Hogwarts for the school year on the Hogwarts Express, only for dementors to suddenly board the train. One enters the trio's compartment, causing Harry to pass out, but new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, Professor Lupin, repels the dementors. At Hogwarts, Headmaster Albus Dumbledore announces the dementors will be guarding the school while Sirius is at large. Hogwarts groundskeeper Rubeus Hagrid is announced as the new Care of Magical Creatures teacher. His first class goes awry when Draco Malfoy deliberately provokes the hippogriff, Buckbeak, who attacks him. Draco exaggerates his injury, and his father, Lucius Malfoy, later has Buckbeak sentenced to death.
So that encompasses a lot of things. The introduction of the Dementors, we got to talk about. The icing over of the glass, which later is the icing over of the water, and the icing over of the broom when they're flying. There's just so many things that he's setting up here that become important later, right? And then the design of the Dementors, the way that they're floaty and wispy, but also skeletal. They have the skeletal hands reaching out. It's very creepy for a children's ostensibly movie. And I mean, this moment alone signifies this is a different sort of film. Like, there's nothing like this in the other two.
That scene when it like crashes, like the train is stopped, and as they board, it like crashes open, and I'm just like, all I can think about is, how are any of the teachers okay with this? Like, how is that like that's got to be, they like, I know that the Dementors are looking for Sirius and everything like that, but like, it's got to be horrifying for anyone who's in that scenario. So like, for the Dementors to come aboard and be all creepy and
I was never clear on how many teachers would be on the same train ride. Is it everybody, or
I'm
I would
sure
assume
a lot
some
of
of them are probably there early, right? You gotta have pre-prep for the starting semester.
Right. I think a lot of them like live there, but yeah, I mean, Lupin was there, so I assume somebody else is there,
and he wasn't happy with it.
Yeah, but that scene, like the creeping and the magic used to open that door, like the sort of like grasping the air that like pulls open the compartment door, and
then starts sucking his soul out. We see his essence leaving his body. Like, what is that? We don't know.
That's what I was going to ask you about. Is like, what? So is that like them sucking the happiness out? Is that sucking like part of the soul? Like, are they losing something there, or is it just representative of like, like, are they actually losing part of their soul there? Probably not, but like, I don't know.
Maybe.
Something's being pulled out.
Maybe Harry's never the same after every time that happens. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it scary, right? It's the unknown. And what is it doing to you? And clearly it's going to kill you if it keeps doing it.
Yeah.
And why? And why is it so obsessed with Harry? And like all of that, like, you know, it poses all these questions.
Right.
And then we get the transition into Hogwarts with the chorus, and I think that's a really cool scene. I just the way it's shot, the way the music sort of transitions us inside. And then I also think the chorus is, once again, a foreshadow of the sort of new sound that is going to be employed for a lot of these magic spells, especially the more important ones like the Patronus, where you get almost like a chorus of angel sound that it's very otherworldly and ethereal, and it backs up sort of this like existential threat that the Dementors pose, and like the idea of happiness coming from this like chorus of angel spells. That all works for me. And then it's interesting that they have a chorus here, right? It almost as like a auditory foreshadowing moment.
So you mentioned the sound of magic, like the sound that the magic spells take on in this, and I find that to be, again, something that carries through. It's just these things he created, or you know, his team created the sound of magic, and it like up until this point, I think there's noises that go along with it, but like when Expelliarmus is cast, there's a specific sound to that. when Patronus is cast, there's a specific sound to that. And I think that that's genius. I think that connecting, it's like a lightsaber making a certain noise. It's like those things that embed themselves in your brain, whether you realize it or it's subliminal or what, it's effective. And to talk about sound in general, the score, again, John Williams, I don't know if you knew this or not, though, this is the last film that John Williams actually wrote new Harry Potter music for.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
So, he's still credited. They're still using his music in the following movies, but this is the last one that he wrote new music for. So, legendary John Williams. He's popped up many times in this podcast, many times. So, it's just, I mean, and like, there's those little John Williams moments where you hear the score rising and you just feel like that he just understands, like, in this case, magic, and like in another case, space wars with wizards, and then in another case, Jaws and all of these things. He's a master of his craft, and everyone knows it.
I have to point out too, my wife noticed that, she's the one who actually got me onto the reflections thing, and she was talking about how, Harry sees himself in the glass. Harry sees himself later on when he thinks he sees his father, but it ends up being himself. And then I watched that Nerd Writer video, and he was talking about reflections. So obviously onto something there, and like passing through mirrors, passing through windows. They're not always perfect reflections. Sometimes they're dark and muddied. And I think there's a long history of reflections, meaning different things in literary pieces and in film. So it's interesting that he's engaging with that on top of the sort of like clockwork nature, and on top of what he's doing thematically with the colors and everything else. Like, there's a lot going on in this movie.
Definitely.
Even Hogwarts itself is like a clock
Right.
in this film, which I'm not sure if that's true elsewhere, but you have a giant pendulum swinging behind them. Like, it's looming, and it's like itself a clock, and in clockwork motion.
Right. That specific portion, I think, is the clock tower. Like, there is a clock tower in Hogwarts. So I think like they're just showcasing that a lot in this movie. But like you say, one of the things that like struck me this time, and I feel like every time I watch a movie, I notice something new, whether it's big or small. This time, I couldn't help but notice every single scene transition is masterfully planned. Every single one. It'll be like you were just talking about the reflection in the glass where Harry's very dark, and we go into it. That reflection from the glass in the Hogwarts Express turns into a puddle that a wheel rolls over, and it fades, and then that's a scene transition. Every single one is genius, and it's like that's the type of like it's so in keep it keeps you engrossed in the film. It's not jarring. Right. It takes you from scene to scene rather than a cut. It's a transition, and it just like that was like really blowing me away in this one. And the reflections that you talked about, another reflection that I was thinking about is the Boggart, right? The Boggart is a reflection of you. It's a reflection of your fear.
Well, and held within a mirrored cabinet. Wardrobe, whatever you want to call it, yeah. That the class is looking at, and that the camera actually enters through and passes through.
And those are those are amazing. Those shots where they're traveling through glass is like absolutely, it's just like that takes so much work to pull off. And he does it so many times, and it's because he wants it's that film language. Like anyone, even a child might not necessarily understand what just happened, but it's in there subliminally. Like something's happened, and it's like, it doesn't necessarily have to bonk you over the head and say reflection. This is what's going on, but it's like an overall feeling that you get from things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about Draco exaggerating his injury and all the Buckbeak stuff. How do you like the Buckbeak scene?
It was good. I mean, I actually really appreciated Harry flying around on Buckbeak more. I don't know if I've seen this movie more than maybe 2 other times. And this was a completely night and day different experience watching this movie, having just read the book. And it's because I can tell why things are important. And I remember the first time I saw the Buckbeak thing going, why does this matter? And it's because I'm coming off of the first 2 movies where they're like, none of this stuff really matters that much as far as like, it's just cool magic, like revel in it. But this is like, I thought when I first saw it, like, oh, it's just Harry Potter flying on a magical creature and we're going to spend all this time watching him do it. But here it's showing, first off, Harry's sort of isolation, it being sort of special, right? And like being the one to do this is sort of the nature of his reality, and how isolating that can be. But then also setting up Buckbeak as an important character in and of itself, and the connection between the two. And then not to mention you get the reflections of the water again as he's flying over it. So there's just all these things happening that makes that scene cooler to me. And you get a cool sense of scale, and you see Hogwarts, you see all this stuff from the skies that shows how a different perspective can be very valuable to Harry here, I think. And he's gaining one through this.
Yeah, and I think that, like I said before, that's like one of the major things for me is really getting a good understanding of Hogwarts, really understanding space, where within space we are, I think helps to ground this whole, like the whole castle. I think before it was like, we knew the Great Hall, we knew the Gryffindor Common Room, we knew the staircases, we knew like hallways here and there. We never got a sense of exactly where we were. We get repeat moments in specific locations. We get these huge moments that connect, like, oh, where's the Whomping Willow in relation to the castle? Like we had that in the second movie as well, but like I think that we get a more clear version of it. And the birds, like whether it's that small bird that gets whacked or Hedwig, the transitioning of the seasons there, again, just amazing transitions.
Yeah, and establishing, like you said, like the grounds, the spaces, the important areas that we're going to see scenes in later. So it serves sort of a sneaky purpose than maybe you don't even realize it's doing.
Okay, so the next bit of summary is: the fat lady's portrait is found ruined and empty. Hiding in another painting, she tells Dumbledore that Sirius has entered the castle. During a stormy Quidditch match against Hufflepuff, Dementors attack Harry, causing him to fall off his broomstick. At Hogsmeade, Harry is shocked to learn that not only has Sirius been his father's best friend and apparently betrayed them to Voldemort, but is also Harry's godfather. Lupin privately teaches Harry to defend himself against Dementors using the Patronus charm.
Yeah, I mean, and speaking of Lupin, I mean, we got to talk about those Boggart scenes. I know we mentioned them earlier with the reflection stuff, but I want you to tell me if I'm crazy, because I'm starting to think I might be being haunted by a other project we've done or something. But at some point during this, one of the students transforms a giant snake Boggart into a giant clown Boggart that is supposed to be funny, I guess, but is actually still quite scary. Is this a reference to Pennywise? Is there any chance that's what's going on here?
I don't know.
Obviously,
maybe.
the new movies hadn't come out yet. The 1990 version had with Tim Curry, and the book was out in the 80s. Possible that Alfonso Cuarón could have read it.
Well, I'll put it this way.
Famously, the Boggart is very similar to a Pennywise type creature.
Yeah. I'll put it this way. I think that the 1990 miniseries mixed with the 1985, 1984, 85 book made people 86. Okay, so that I think people were probably there were people like in isolation who are afraid of clowns, but like that made a generation of people afraid of clowns, period. So I think to say that like it's not technically a reference in the way that like clowns are scary to a lot of people now, I think that it probably
So you're saying
is.
through cultural osmosis it might have been.
I think so, yeah.
But would you be shocked to learn that Alfonso Cuarón was actually a fan of Stephen King's It and was specifically referencing Pennywise here?
No, I wouldn't be shocked.
I wouldn't be shocked either. Sure. I'm not saying that's what happened, but I wouldn't be shocked to hear that, because to me it made enough sense. Like this, there's enough of there where it's like maybe he's doing that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can move on. And I also think it's funny because somebody pointed out to us, because we made a joke in I think our 100th episode about like, oh, what's some recurring things we need to start doing for the podcast? And somebody pointed out to us that we often will like reference it because it was our first project, I guess. I don't know. We reference it during a lot of other episodes. So I got to keep the tradition going here and reference it here.
Yeah, it's always going to be there, I think.
Yeah.
So, but that Boggart scene is fun. I do like it. And I wanted to ask you, unless it's something that you don't want to talk about, what would your Boggart turn into?
Oh, God.
You can name a couple things. I'll lead off if you need me to.
Yeah, you lead off. I got to think about that. Yeah, I got to think.
Okay, so mine, I think, is like everyone's fear ultimately. But like realistically, like I'm not afraid of heights. I'm not afraid of any like creatures, anything like that. For me, I think it's like I'm afraid, and I think eventually in one of the Harry Potter books we get this, but like the losing of a loved one. So like that, that's my
What does
fear.
that look like as a Boggart, though?
It's okay. So I mean, it's technically a spoiler, so skip like 15 seconds. But in one of the books, Molly sees her family. Like she sees the corpses of her family. It changes into the different corpses of her family.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. So that would be pretty terrifying. Yeah. I mean, I think. Yeah. Yeah, probably death. I think just death in general, whether that's personified or like my own death. If I was confronted with that, it would be pretty terrifying.
Yeah, that's the question, I guess.
That's scarier than like a snake or something for me, which I don't like snakes, but
But to some people, a snake might represent death. It's like it could be.
Yeah, that's true.
That's true. But in general, it's your death or just anyone's death or death in general? Because I feel like a dementor.
No. I think my death. I think the idea of death is frightening, and I think to pretend otherwise is kind of silly, at least personally. And I fully admit that I fear death, and I think that that's a normal human thing to be afraid of.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that would probably be mine.
I guess the other thing is like, is a dementor for Harry kind of a representation of death? Because it's like because of the dementors, he hears his mother scream from when his mother died.
Yeah.
So it's like I feel like we kind of have the same fear as Harry there.
And honestly, that actually is kind of a good point, that a Boggart is treated as something that's like not that can be overcome, but like people being faced with their worst fears is incredibly dark. And the idea that a bunch of students are going to line up excitedly to come face to face with their worst fear is, I don't know, man. Like, I would definitely, this would be a traumatic day in class.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because some people's fears are not going to be, just like a snake or a spider that you can put on ice skates or whatever, roller skates.
And that's what the scene basically shows us, right? Lupin has to jump in the way because it's like, what would Harry's, like, he realizes as the clown is clicking back and forth what Harry's fear would be. He's like, is it Voldemort? Is it going to become Voldemort right now? Is it going to become, death itself? And I think that's kind of what we get out of it.
And then his becomes the moon.
Right. So I feel like lucky day for Lupin, though, right? He got a few students who were afraid of normal things. Like, I think
exactly.
Neville, like the idea of having students face their fears and make them funny and laugh at them and like deal with it that way. Great idea in theory until a Harry Potter comes along and death is what they fear, or, an embodiment of someone else dying or something like that. So let's talk about the Quidditch match. Well, first off, the fat lady is found to be missing. Dumbledore finds out that Sirius is in the castle. They have to try to protect the kids, so they're all sleeping together in the Great Hall. How did they not think? Clearly, they knew there were students that were awake. Like Severus and Dumbledore were having a conversation, and they're talking about like, headmaster, remember I told you, and this and that, and they're talking about secret things. It's obviously for the good of the audience, but it's funny to think that like Harry obviously is awake right now. Somebody's awake.
Oh, I see. When they're all laying on the floor and they're walking. Yeah.
But I do like the Great Hall with like that sort of starry galaxy thing up above. Like that looks amazing.
And I feel like doesn't Dumbledore say something kind of cheesy about like, in dreams we can be truly free or something? I can't remember. Yeah,
but I don't mind that. I'm into my Dumbledore being like that. Yeah.
It's fine, but it just like it was kind of like almost condescending, right? About like, oh, we let them dream. They're just children,
Yeah, true.
I'm not saying that's not in character. I mean, it could be, but it stood out to me.
So we talked in the last episode about Quidditch, and like you still felt like you didn't connect with it quite as much. I feel like this is one of the more exciting Quidditch because the addition of the Storm, the addition of the Dementors, the addition of the changed uniforms. It seems like more actiony. Were you into it, or did it kind of strike you?
Yeah, so I got some feedback about that, sort of indirectly. One of my wife's friends had listened to the podcast and maybe took some umbrage with me not liking Quidditch.
Oh yeah,
how dare I? She's probably not alone thinking that. I think it's interesting. It's notable that the Quidditch is sort of toned down in this movie. We get really just one real Quidditch scene, and then the second one that comes, which is the one that I actually found less interesting, doesn't occur in the film. I don't know. I mean, like, I think it's fine. You know what I mean? Like, and I totally think it's valid for people to look at me and go, how dare you? Right. And I was thinking about it. I think if I was reading the book for the first time, I had never seen the movie yet. The book had just come out and I picked it up and read it. I didn't know what was coming. I would be way more into the Quidditch than I am now revisiting after watching the entire series of movies. Because it just feels like slightly less important than the main plot to me.
Right.
At times. And like you said, in this movie, it works because it's the Dementor stuff. It has a role to play. So yeah, I guess listen to our other episode and I talk a little bit more about that. If
I
you're
think
curious.
I think visually this one works really well because it is distinctly different. I think for people who are like, oh, Quidditch is getting old or something like that, if you felt like it was something that was, this is very clearly a different kind of Quidditch match. There's umbrellas flying through the air, the rain is pouring down. It's just a different scene than we've seen before. It's not bright and colorful green grass and like everybody in the stands all happy.
And even during Quidditch, you can't escape the Dementors and the darkness,
right? And not to mention,
else,
that's what I was going to say is that moment with the Grim, where Harry's on his broomstick, looks out and sees the Grim. Great shot. And then when he comes face to face with the Dementors, he's like dodging them and flipping around and falls off eventually. I don't know. I think that's a fun Quidditch scene for sure.
I agree.
So this is around the time that Harry sneaks into Hogsmeade. He's gotten the map from Fred and George, which I wanted to mention. The Nerdwriter made a great connection between the footsteps in the snow when he's using the invisibility cloak, representing and kind of drawing parallels to the footsteps that we see on the Marauders map. That's awesome. I never even thought about that until I'd seen that video. Really cool connection and kind of foreshadowing that he was about to be, it's like this footsteps have been shown a few times throughout this movie up to that point.
So speaking of footsteps, this is, I think, the first misstep that I would argue in this movie, and that is not making the connection between the Marauders map and Sirius Black and James Potter and the rest of them. We get the names, but we're not told who Prongs is. We're not told, you know what I mean? Like, we don't know.
You're saying you would have liked to have eventually seen the scene that we got in the book with like kind of showing their background,
any sort of acknowledgement, because it's later Lupin doesn't even say like, yeah, this was a thing that we used.
Well, I mean, it's implied, I think, for sure.
No, because it's something that they stole from
Filch.
like a Filch, and
Yeah.
it's just like a magical item that Lupin's like, yeah, I'm gonna let you have it. It's magical, and like obviously they have a familiarity with it because Sirius says like, oh, the map never lies, and it's something that they used, but it's not something that they like have ownership over. And to me, it's an item in the world that represents their friendship and drives home the idea that these guys and all knew each other when they were in school and they had a bond, and that bond is something that I don't think is emphasized enough in this movie. And because of it, later on when we get the reveals that Sirius is actually a good guy, when he all of a sudden offers to have Harry come live with him, I remember being completely disoriented the first few times I saw this movie and going like, wait a minute, this guy is like, oh, I guess he's good now. And like, even though he's good, like, I don't trust him. Like, I'm just starting to understand who he is. And oh, wait a minute. So if he's good, I have to think back about the conversation that was had about him being friends with James Potter and all this stuff and go, so that, okay, this part was true and this part was not true. And I have to like let go of the villain part and replace it with and there's a lot of work I have to do while the movie's still going. That in the book, like we talked about, the explanation scene is very long. And I'm not saying it needs to be as long in the movie, but it felt to me like there's a few moments early on, and then you follow it up with maybe a little bit rushed scene at the reveal to where Sirius's connection to Harry and the price he's paid for his friendship, the sacrifices he's made, some of that doesn't come across as strongly. And I think that is the core and maybe the most important bit coming out of the third book. And I can see that if you're a huge book fan, being a little frustrated that message isn't delivered as well, I would argue, in the movie. For someone like me who hadn't read the book, just saw the movie, I never felt the connection that people had to Sirius Black. That I noticed other people who read the book loved Sirius Black, one of their favorite characters.
Right.
And reading the book myself, I can see why.
Right.
But the movie itself, I don't think quite achieves that, and I think that is a slight flaw in this movie.
All right, I'm of two minds with this. So let me start with my first one. As the book reader who went into this movie, I absolutely agree. I wish there was a scene that showed or even some explanation, some connection there. I totally agree with that. From the flip side, in wanting to tell an efficient story and wanting to, like, I understand what you're saying in terms of like laying it all out. But there's a couple of moments in these movies where it's rewarding to book fans, maybe more, for having read and seeing them. I don't know. I feel like this might be one of those scenarios because I didn't see this movie without having already read it. I'd never seen I never had that experience. So I knew what the importance was. And I think that in future movies, we get more of what the importance is between that connection as well. But for what you're saying right now, I get why you could approach it and think that like it's kind of lacking in sort of the connection between them, because it is important going forward. Like the connection between James and Sirius is important, and I think it is driven home even more. But like you say, yeah, I totally get that. I could see having just, I don't know. I don't think we needed any sort of flashback or anything like that, but having said in more words, like we used to come here and hang out, in the Shrieking Shack.
I think the Marauders map, as bringing it back to my original point, I think was a path to doing it. Mm-hmm. There should have been an explanation of who Prongs and I forget the names, all the names, right? Who they are, and the fact that they use the map and used to do things together as students would have further shown the friendship of these characters and given us some more connections, right? Because otherwise we're being asked to remember conversations that happened a while ago in the film, and those conversations were about why Sirius Black was such a villain, and that was like the main takeaway. And you have to like discount the villain part and remember the other part that was talking about him being friends, and that is kind of hard to do in the moment, which you have to do in order to buy the warmth that is all of a sudden being felt there.
I think for me,
and like I said, it's hard for you to probably imagine what it would have been like to see this movie without having read the book, because that's not how you experienced it. But I think that's the challenge that honestly this movie needs to rise to, is to convey that very important relationship, and convey it convincingly. And to me, I'm not saying it fails. I just don't think it quite pulls it off. Like it to me, that's where it gets a little bit of a negative in my overall marks.
So on the flip side of that, though, I think the thing that does really sell it to me, the thing that does make me buy Sirius as the person who could take Harry into a happier life, and the fact that he is to be trusted, is the reaction by Pettigrew, right? So as soon as you make the connection that like, oh, it was Pettigrew and not Sirius, all their conversation there in the Shrieking Shack, to me, is always sold it enough, I guess, because what we're getting is Pettigrew is saying, you don't understand what the Dark Lord can do. You don't understand the power that he has and how much he can affect you. And then we get Sirius saying, I would have died rather than betray my friends. And I think that is enough of a line right there, and the way that it's delivered to sell it to me, at least, in addition to the fact that like we can see Pettigrew as a coward and that he clearly did do this. So everything up to that point was put on Sirius. So I don't know. I see both sides.
No, and you're right. I think that the reveal that he's a good person and that he's not guilty works. I think it's the connection to Harry that needed like maybe a little bit more buffing up, and a little bit more of like the connection to James Potter and Harry's parents and all of that, and the being a godfather and how he originally thought that relationship was going to go, that then got thrown off by going to Azkaban. That's the stuff that was a little lacking, but you're right. The reveal that he's a good person. I also really loved the moment where he screams about like 12 years in Azkaban, and like you can feel his pain and what he's been through and why he's so ragged now. And there's just a lot of great acting going on, and it's hard to be a little bit critical here because I feel like it's such a good movie, and I'm not trying to take away from that. But I am also, I want to acknowledge that if you are a huge super fan of those moments in the book and you don't see them here, you could also be like a little frustrated with feeling like those moments weren't delivered with the same power that you felt them when you read them. And as someone who also saw the movie, I have the experience of knowing that these moments didn't land for me the way that they do from the book. But if you can come in as someone who's read the book and you see this movie, you can come in and with that pre-knowledge and just be happy because you already have it. You already understand what's going on. So it depends on how you watch this movie, I guess, and what you're looking for.
Yeah, I do feel like there's a lot of like legwork that's put in to tie a lot of these characters together. So like the conversation with Harry on the bridge with Lupin, where he's talking about his mother and he's talking about his father. ties Lupin to Harry, that ties their family together, that then when we see Lupin's on Sirius's side, we can tie all that together as well. We know Lupin's a good guy, but in that moment there's that twist where we don't know where he's landing. I think there's enough there to have tied all the characters together to like explain it, but I do understand like making it maybe a little more clear would have helped audiences. But let's catch us up to kind of where we're at right now.
Right.
So this Quidditch match, Harry falls off the broomstick. Broomstick is destroyed. Harry learns about Sirius being his father's best friend, and then we're getting the lessons that Lupin is teaching Harry how to use the Patronus charm because he's been attacked by a Dementor again. Which I actually love those scenes in the office, in Lupin's office, where Harry's learning the Patronus and tying it to a specific memory.
Yeah.
So to move on to the next section, after Harry, Ron, and Hermione witness Buckbeak's execution, Ron's pet rat Scabbers bites him and escapes. When Ron gives chase, a large dog appears and drags both Ron and Scabbers into a hole at the Whomping Willow's base. This leads the trio to an underground passage of the Shrieking Shack, where they discover that the dog is actually Sirius, who's an Animagus. Lupin arrives and embraces Sirius as an old friend. He admits to being a werewolf and explains that Sirius is innocent. Sirius was falsely accused of betraying the Potters to Voldemort, as well as murdering 12 Muggles and their mutual friend Peter Pettigrew. It is revealed that Scabbers is actually Pettigrew, an Animagus who betrayed the Potters and committed the murders.
Yeah. Which I stepped all over this scene talking about it.
Yeah, we're caught up now though, so we're good.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you about the Animagus because I meant to ask in the first one. We know our Patronuses. We've talked about our Boggarts, what our Boggarts would become. What is your Animagus?
Oh, I'm a dog too, just like Sirius.
Yeah.
Absolutely, man.
What color,
I'm
what breed?
such a dog person. I
Yeah.
love dogs. I always have. And I assume that if I were to transform into an animal, it would probably be a dog.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, a specific dog, maybe a lab, black lab. I don't know.
I'm into it. My black lab's sitting behind me right now. So I as much as I love dogs, and believe me, I do, I feel like I really would want to become a bird. I just feel like there's a freedom to that, right? Like
What kind of bird?
It's a good question. I was thinking about it. I think probably like a falcon.
Okay, so not like not a peacock?
Peacock, yeah. A penguin, actually. I'd be a penguin.
Yeah. No, a falcon. That's
Falcon.
cool.
Yeah, I'm into that. Flying. I just
Yeah.
think that the being able to fly would be nice. Okay, so the next section here, Snape arrives to apprehend Black, but Harry knocks him unconscious with the Expelliarmus charm. After forcing Pettigrew back into human form, Lupin and Sirius prepare to kill him, but Harry convinces them to turn Pettigrew over to the Dementors. As the group departs, the full moon rises and Lupin transforms into a werewolf. Sirius transforms into his dog form to fight him off. In the midst of the chaos, Pettigrew transforms back into a rat and escapes. Harry and Sirius are attacked by Dementors, and Harry sees a figure in the distance save them by casting a powerful Patronus. He believes the mysterious figure is his deceased father before passing out. He awakens to discover that Sirius has been captured and sentenced to the Dementor's kiss.
This is, in and of itself, a surprising and exciting end to this story. We talked about, right? Like, you get the confrontation, but then you get the surprise twist, and you get the werewolf attack, and you get the moment of casting the Patronus and saving Sirius. But then there's also the mystery of like, was that his father or was that something else? And that, obviously that leads into this sort of like fourth act we talked about in the book, which is definitely a change for this series. This is all just good stuff and good storytelling, extremely well plotted, and the way it plays in with the other timeline just all works really well. Also, what an awesome and scary design for this werewolf. The lankiness, the danger. It all just works really well.
Yeah, they could have turned him into like a huge, bulky, traditional werewolf, but they went with like kind of a skinny. It's in fitting with Lupin. I really like that design for sure, and
yeah.
You know, a lot of the CG looks good still. By the way, all of it actually.
Yeah, it does.
It really does. The Dementors look great. Sirius is the dog. Like you can tell that it's not like up to today's exact. You know what we're getting in the effects departments, but I mean everything looks fine. Like really good still. The werewolf. Yeah, this and from here on, this whole movie is just absolutely incredible. All of this stuff, the way it weaves in and out, the way in a second when we get to the time turner, the score starts to take on like a ticking time clock. Like this sort of sound that goes along with it too. It's like that tick 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 that's associated with the time turner. I mean, it's great, and I want to talk about the Dementor's kiss though. This like, I believe from what I understand in the book, it's like a legit kiss, like mouth to mouth, and they're sucking out your soul. But I think this representation is even scarier because it's like you can see what's happened. And I might be wrong. I'm sure someone will correct me if it's not an actual kiss in the book. I just remember reading, like when we just read it, I felt like it was saying like actual mouth to mouth. Yeah, but like the happiness or whatever we talked about being sucked out, that stream being sucked out, led by like his actual soul floating out. I felt like all that really worked, and like all the Dementors coming down was really, really creepy and scary.
Yeah, there's a lot of them too, and the way they swarm. I gotta say, I mean, maybe that's the thing we do. We always reference other projects, but I was getting Ringwraith vibes again, and I think you have to acknowledge that there is some sort of visual referencing here of the Ringwraiths and the way that they encircle Frodo on Weathertop. I think in particular, I was thinking of that a little bit here.
Right. I mean, yeah, large hooded creature with some sort of powers. Like, I think that it's in very.
Can't see their faces, otherworldly and ethereal time. As Frodo puts on the ring and sees their other forms, right? Like we're getting some otherworldliness and some ideas that there are things going on beyond our understanding. And I don't know. I find it to be, and once again, it might just be that sort of cultural osmosis thing. I'm not saying necessarily that Alfonso Cuarón watched Fellowship of the Ring and was like, I got to reference this. Does that even line up timeline-wise? I guess it does. Yeah, it would have come out before, but I'm not saying that's what's going on here. I just think that Ringwraiths and Dementors share some common DNA.
Yeah. Interesting motives though, right? Like I feel like we know the motives of a Ringwraith. They are the motives of Sauron. Like to get the ring. and in this case, the Dementors, like you never really know where they're landing. Like they seem like they're always evil, but are they? They're supposedly a hand of the ministry, and it's like, can they actually control them, or did they just set them loose? I don't know.
Yeah,
real crazy stuff.
We talk about them in the last episode, I think, and talk about the danger they represent of the wizarding world that is barely controlled. Yeah.
This is the last section here. Acting on Dumbledore's advice, Harry and Hermione travel back in time with Hermione's time turner and watch themselves and Ron repeat the night's events. They save Buckbeak from execution and witness the Dementors overpower Harry and Sirius. The present Harry realizes that it was actually him who conjured the Patronus and does so again. Harry and Hermione rescue Sirius, who escapes with Buckbeak. Exposed as a werewolf, Lupin resigns from teaching to prevent an uproar from parents. He also returns the Marauder's map back to Harry, given he is no longer in authority to confiscate the contraband. Sirius sends Harry a firebolt broom, and he happily takes a ride on it.
Man, I have to say, the idea that McGonagall is going to just let Hermione have a time turner to attend more classes is a plot hole. It doesn't make sense. It's too powerful a magic item, and McGonagall is too much of a stickler about the rules to allow a student to use it. It's like I don't even know what a good a metaphor would be, but
my thing is technically when push came to shove, McGonagall knew Hermione, and Hermione never betrayed McGonagall in any way with the time turner. All she did was go to classes and use it to go to classes all year round. I don't know. It doesn't bother me because ultimately, like, it didn't become an issue. Like, they didn't mess up the timeline. Like, it all worked out.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is like the possibility of it being there is too much to give to a kid, which I get, but I'm still for it because McGonagall knew and Hermione did right by her.
It's fine. I mean, it's a YA story, ultimately. So some of that I'm willing to suspend disbelief and just go with it. We're also at a transition period where some of that is okay, maybe, you know what I mean? So ultimately it doesn't ruin the story for me. But I get why people can take umbrage with this. And to me, it comes down to the power of the device and the potential it has to change reality. It's just too big,
right,
to be given to a student.
So not necessarily to what you're saying specifically, but after the conversation we had on our last episode, I started thinking about time turners, and I started thinking about why they weren't utilized before they were destroyed in Harry Potter. in terms of world breaking, why wasn't a time turner used to reverse the things that Voldemort did and to save people,
Right.
and to jump in and like fight him in some way or do something differently, or not, time turner back to the point that you kill Hitler, you know what I mean? Like that sort of kill Voldemort. Like just like everybody says,
Right.
like, would you go back in time and kill Hitler? Why wouldn't you just time turner back in time and kill Voldemort?
Right,
as a
because you're
baby or
saying
whatever?
time turners existed around the time that like Harry Potter's family got murdered. So why didn't Dumbledore use the time turner to go back so he could save them?
But I think it ultimately comes back to that idea of determinism, right? Like maybe it's like even if you time turned back to that, you couldn't change those things because like in some way nothing like even though Harry and Hermione go back in time, they didn't change anything. They just made sure things happened as they did.
Yeah. Wait, well, now we're getting to our Arrival stuff. Listen to our last episode to talk about that. No, and like I'm okay with time travel being used in a movie. I think it's interesting. I think it adds it definitely draws a lot of challenging questions for like how does this universe work? Because like you said, we see the rocks hitting people. We see we hear the howl that saves them so that they can go on. Hermione and Harry Potter can go on to do the things that they're doing because they were saved by their past selves. So it's almost one timeline. It's very Terminator. It's very unified and deterministic, really, like you said. It works narratively. It's the conceptually the idea of these things existing in this world, and the idea that McGonagall of all people would be brazen enough to allow someone to use it just is pushing it too far for me.
Yeah.
Let's move on, though. I don't want to harp on it too much because I do actually really think this is a cool time travel story. You know what I mean? Like, set all that aside. This is a well-done time travel story. I love the way it's crafted. It was in the book as well. I think it's executed well, and it makes for a very fun and interesting end to this movie. Not to mention Buckbeak coming back, being alive, and then the way Buckbeak saves him from the werewolves, which I think is a movie-only thing. Saves him from Lupin. Really cool. It just makes me like Buckbeak even more in the movies than I did in the book, which I liked him a lot in the book too.
Yeah, and you just kind of made me think of something because Pettigrew escapes, right? A couple of things that I want to talk about with the map and time travel and all these things. If we want to talk about potential, world-breaking things. So first off, it's been said a million times, but didn't Fred and George using the Marauders map ever see a guy named Peter Pettigrew hanging out with Harry Potter, with Ron Weasley and Harry Potter? Right. You know what I mean? They would have seen potentially.
You might have noticed that. Yeah. I mean, maybe even if they don't know who Peter Pettigrew is, it would have been weird to see the name Peter Pettigrew.
Right. Because it's like in their common or in their bedroom where all of them are sleeping, and then there's one additional person who they don't know. So anyway, moving on.
Not to mention, it's kind of creepy to imagine these guys having this map all the time and being able to know where everyone is and what they're doing at all times.
Yeah.
It's very that's a violation of privacy that's pretty significant.
Yeah. Luckily, our heroes never use it for anything too nasty or bad. So.
Right. Yeah.
So another
just go with
thing.
it.
Exactly. So another one is in this film. There's a reference actually to another character in the Harry Potter lore. On the map, there's a reference to another character. It's Newt Scamander. And so
I didn't catch that. So how is that referenced in the map?
He's on the map at one point. And what people's theory is, because he's on there, up until this point, there were no plans to have, in 2004, there was no plans to have any Newt Scamander adventures as far as I know.
Right.
So I think that it was just he was a famous character who was known for, creating the Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them novels within the world of Harry Potter. So he was friends with Dumbledore. So people theorize that maybe he was just coming to visit Hogwarts and he was there.
Wait, so his footsteps are walking around on the map?
Yes.
Wow, I did not catch that. I don't know how I missed that.
Someone found that. Some eagle-eyed viewers found that, and I mean, I didn't notice it. I saw somebody say that they saw it online, and I saw a screenshot of it. So it's there.
Huh.
So I don't know. Interesting to think about. He would be very old. I mean, I guess Dumbledore would be even older though. So it's not like it's not possible. But we'll see if it becomes world-breaking at some point with all the new stuff that's been added with the newer movies. Yeah. Another interesting thing to think about. So Lupin. He has the Marauders map, right? And he sees Harry, Peter Pettigrew, Ron Weasley, Sirius Black. He sees all these people on the map running towards the Whomping Willow, and that's how he knows to go to the Whomping Willow. Wouldn't he have seen the duplicate Harry and Hermione on the map as well, if the map never lies.
Yeah, you're right.
So we would see two Harrys, two Hermione. Maybe he just was like, either he didn't see it, which
He didn't look for that.
or he didn't. Yeah,
area
he was
on
so
the map,
excited
I
by
guess.
like the fact that Peter Pettigrew, Sirius Black, all the stuff was going down that he saw where they were and just ran there immediately. Another thing that I was just brought to my attention, so I figured I'd point it out.
So another thing that's interesting about these plot holes idea is someone who I am in the midst of writing a novel right now. Plot holes can seem like a death knell, like, oh God, there's a potential plot hole here, and now I just got to burn my entire manuscript. It can show that like sometimes stories can exist with plot holes. It's not that you want to, like, you should obviously be looking to fill them and explain them as much as possible, but like, if analysis by guys like us or whoever, people are going to find plot holes in your work. It's going to happen, especially if you write something that's intricate and long form and has spaces for this to happen. And it can be okay. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay on occasion to have a plot hole. You hope that they're not gaping, massive ones that are breaking things, but it's okay. You don't have to burn your manuscript down just because you find a potential little minor plot hole in there. And I'm talking to myself, by the way, when I say this. I'm totally speaking to myself. That is the lesson I'm learning from this.
we were getting nitpicky, so I was down to get nitpicky. All those things that I just named, I don't care about, because ultimately, like I said, I really enjoy this novel, and honestly, like I said, this could be my favorite Harry Potter movie, and I would honestly be willing to go as far as, like, I think I may enjoy this film more than I enjoy the book. So I'm sure that'll anger some Harry Potter fans, but I mean, that's just how I feel about it. When you put a material like this that I'm already a huge fan of in the hands of a filmmaker like Alfonso Cuarón, and like what he can bring to it and the layers that he can create and like the legacy that he would have within this universe, I just don't think you can look at that and not realize how important it is. And I think that's part of the reason why it's so important to me.
I think I agree with you. And as much as I've been a little bit critical, I think intellectually, visually, artistically, I prefer this film to the book. But I will say that I think the emotional core of this story is better handled in J.K. Rowling's hands, and I got to give it to her. I think that the understanding her story and knowing what's important for the emotional arc of these characters, it connects better in the book, and I'm really glad that I've read it now, because I think that these two as a pair work really, really well, right? Like you get that in the book, but then you see the artistic vision of this film, and the way those two interact with each other is really fun. And I don't think, and this is something bigger about adaptation podcasts, which there are others out there, spoiler, we're not the only ones doing this. However, I think we do it in somewhat of a unique way in that we don't always pit the film and the book against each other, right? It's not always a versus. It's not a fight. It's like, which one's better, book or movie? And they have to battle to the death, and there can be only one. No, like, we don't do that, because I think we like to celebrate both and look at like what is valid and useful in each version of this story. And I don't like that narrative. Honestly, I don't like the idea that these things have to battle each other, because they both can serve different purposes. And once again, here, if I had to pick one, I think I do maybe like the movie a little more, but I think the experience of reading this book has shown me that the way that I think the story is best consumed is with both. I think I'd feel sorry for someone who only read the book and didn't see this movie.
Right.
But vice versa, I think that it was enriched. I think that the film was better for the fact that I've now read the book. Yeah,
and I do want to mention like the emotional core that you're talking about. I do agree with that, because as much as I've realized over time that James Potter and his friends are not as likable as I thought that they were when I was a kid growing up, because there are things that, like, it's pretty fucked up, some of the stuff that they do, and I can understand why a lot of people don't necessarily relate to those characters. But I was always really, really drawn to their stories, and the story of all four of them together around the castle and the adventures that they would have. So like that being that's one of my favorite parts of the books, I totally get like not having it in the movies and how that affects it. So yeah.
Who are the four, by the way? It's Lupin, Sirius, James,
and Pettigrew.
Peter Pettigrew?
Yeah.
He's the fourth?
Yep.
Okay, so Harry's mother was not a part of that?
No.
What's Harry's mother's name?
Lily Potter.
Lily Potter was not a part of that. Okay,
Nope.
interesting. And then Snape, obviously, I feel like, so there's a lot of talk about bullying Snape. And I feel like in this book and in this movie, I don't get a lot of what was going on,
Right,
other
yeah.
than a little bit of like Sirius saying, "Oh, you always with your like chemistry sets and stuff." And I don't remember that a lot in the book, but like I'm assuming that stuff we'll learn about more as we go on, like the
Yeah.
actual bullying, quote unquote.
I feel like you're catching the pull right now. The J.K. Rowling's got the pull. Like now you're starting to like once we get into it for sure. She's setting a lot of stuff up
with Snape in particular.
Well, Snape, James, Sirius,
Yeah.
Pettigrew, everything, Lupin, Lily Potter,
Yeah.
a lot of stuff.
We
being set
definitely
up.
got more of that in the book than we got here,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And that's some of the best stuff, I think.
The couple of things that I do want to mention, because we talked about the things that really, I think, enrich this world. Things like the moment when the maid is walking up to the room at the Leaky Cauldron, knocking on the door, and then like a creature roars at her, and she's like, "I'll come back later." Like these funny comedic moments of like fleshing out the world. Like another one that I loved was all the guys in their bedroom taking the beans or whatever that was making them have different animal noises. Just a scene like that to humanize and like show what it would be like every night at Hogwarts, and like the camaraderie and the friendship around these people and their houses, and I just all of that. Like there's so much of that throughout this film, and it really does create what I think is one of my favorite Harry Potter movies, and it's just like it the legacy that this movie has is like I don't think it can be overstated.
And, anecdotally, that scene in particular made me kind of wish that I had stayed in a dorm my freshman year of college.
Right.
But I didn't, and it made me go like, oh, I don't know. It makes you kind of yearn for that, like that close friendship at a school in particular, that would have been very cool to experience.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of what Harry Potter, as we talked about, does, right? It's like the experiences that you can have at school with friends and who become family, and how close everything is.
I think it's also notable that we don't get a Christmas scene in this movie.
Yeah.
There is no Christmas. And that's something we talked about. Like, I think it's appropriate that we covered some of the other ones around Christmas time, because those are the Christmas movies. And maybe it returns to it. I don't know. I don't remember. But here it's interesting that we don't really get that, and we don't get that feeling that Christmas gives us.
But we do get like a fall winter feeling with pumpkins around, and we get like the snow on the ground, the snow on the Whomping Willow, a lot of that kind of stuff. So I think that it's still in keeping with this season from like October on. I think like a lot of people start, and I think it probably is prompted by those first two, but it like kind of continues the tradition.
Well, it has been a lot of fun returning to the world of the wizarding world of Harry Potter this year. I don't know, like I want to revisit soon. I don't want to wait another full year. I'm eager to get into more of this story, because I feel like I appreciate it a lot more now, and I'm happy that reading this book and watching this movie got me excited to cover more Harry Potter in the future. So if you liked this, let us know, because the more excitement there is around projects, the more we're going to want to get back to them as soon as possible. So convey that to us, because we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. And this, like we've talked about, is a transitional period for Harry Potter. So the next ones, I think for the most part, are pretty grown up, pretty dealing with some crazy issues and stuff. So I can't wait to get back to these ones, because I would say, like, I've read through the first 3,000, you just like so many times, an uncountable number of times, and then 4 I've read through a ton, 5 I've read through a bunch, and then 6 and 7 I would say that are the ones that I've read through maybe like 3 or 4 times each. So
well, and that number is 0 for me for all the rest of these novels. So I'm excited to have the same experience I had this time of like really learning the world and learning the story in a deeper way, and I want to read the next one now, so I'm into it. But that's going to be it for this coverage for us for now. We hope you come back with us next week. We're going to be covering Watchmen in advance of the HBO series coming out. We're going to read the graphic novel, then we're going to watch the original film, just as like a reminder. And hopefully everybody joins us for that, to reminisce a little bit about what we've gotten with Watchmen and get ready for the show that's going to be coming out. So we hope you join us for that. We also wanted to thank a new patron we have, Rebecca H. Thank you for your support. We appreciate it. And we love all our patrons. And if you wanted to find out how to become one yourself, go to patreon.com/ink2film. You can get access to bonus content on there, including things like our brand new reading prompts we're going to be doing, which is when we're giving you advance notice of like, hey, this is what's coming up. If you want to get a jump start on the reading, maybe this is the next 2 or 3 projects we're going to be doing. These are going to be brief little things we're going to be releasing to our new $1 tier. So if you want to learn about that and what other kind of things we're doing, check that out, patreon.com/ink2film.
Connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at Ink to Film. And join the Council of Inklings because that's where we mostly communicate with everybody. We post a lot of polls in there. We post upcoming news for any adaptations, so definitely check that out.
Yeah, and if you wanted to support the podcast, but you don't have any money right now, totally understandable. Money's tight for a lot of people. We get it. Leaving a rating or review online is a perfect way to do that. We woke up to a new one today. I don't know if you even saw it yet. I shared it on social media. I love to see them. It always brightens my day. It made me happy to see. So leave us a rating or review somewhere online, iTunes if you can, and it's greatly appreciated.
We'd like to thank Goblins from Mars for the use of our intro and outro music, and thank you to Jennifer Delazana for providing our transcripts. All right, I'm going to leave one last little secret tidbit here at the end that I forgot to mention in the episode.
Ooh, a secret tidbit.
J.K. Rowling said she got goosebumps when she saw several moments in this film as they inadvertently referred to events in the final 2 books. She stated, people are going to look back on the film and think that those were put in deliberately as clues. So there's 2 things in this movie that she was like surprised made it in because they were almost like kind of predictions by Alfonso Cuarón or something like that. I don't know. Interesting to think about.
Do you want to share what those 2 are?
No.
Or is that too much of a spoiler?
I feel like it might be too much of a spoiler. And I don't even know that I'm correct. There's a couple of things.
But I mean, like everybody's seen these movies by now, right? Here, okay, let's give a spoiler warning and then you can share them with me, or do you not want me to know?
No, I'd rather you not. One of them I'll tell you. One of them.
Tell us one of them.
So this is my
spoiler warning. If you don't want to do, check out. Go ahead.
So this is my thing. I think there are a couple of things that could be leading you down a certain path. One of them is the way that Snape protects Harry, Ron, and Hermione when the werewolf is attacking. It's like up to this point we've seen that he in the first book, in the first movie as well, he was like counterspelling Quirrell in order to like save Harry on the broomstick. There are moments of him being good, but actually putting himself in the way of any harm that would come to these 3. I feel like could be one of them. And again, these are just my theories on what they could be. I could be totally wrong, but this is just what I'm drawing from. Another one, I think there's another one that I think I know that I don't want to say. And then there's a third one that I think might also be, and it's just the relationship with Hermione and Ron. I think in this film is like clearly building.
Yeah, I did catch that actually. There was a couple of moments between Ron and Hermione that seemed to be sort of like a precursor to a potential romantic thing going on.
But I think that's like more obvious. I don't think she would be that surprised to see that in the movie, but who knows? Maybe that could be the other one. The other one that I know I don't want to say because I want you to go in fresh.
Okay. All right, fair enough. So I guess that's going to be it. Until next time.
Thanks for listening.